I tell you what I think the future of Chris Godwin is as speculation begins to ramp up. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. Randy Gregory was introduced to the media and gave his expectations for himself this season. More on that coming up in a little bit, but I wanted to talk about Chris Godwin, and this was something that I was going to talk about on Thursday's episode before all of the Randy Gregory stuff broke. But what is Chris Godwin's future with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? I did a dive into what kind of numbers Godwin could be in line for this season if Liam Cohen truly uses him the same way that Cooper Kupp was utilized just a few years ago. And in a contract year, those numbers could help Godwin stand out in an unbelievably loaded wide receiver free agent class. But I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. Last year was a kind of a rough year for Godwin, despite the fact that he hit 1,000 yards after such a painfully slow start. But I'm going to run through some of these numbers, and some of these I talked about on the Pewter Report podcast on Wednesday when I joined Matt Matera over there. But according to Pro Football Focus, Chris Godwin finished 28th among wide receivers in overall grade. He was 26th in pass catching grade. This was his third straight season with 1,000 yards receiving, but fewest receptions since 2020, his fewest receiving touchdowns since his rookie season, his lowest catch percentage since 2018, his fewest yards per game since 2018, a career low in success rate. So only a 50% success rate for Chris Godwin. And for those that don't know what a success rate is based on these analytic metrics, is getting 40% of the yards needed on first down, 60% of the yards needed on second down, and then 100% of yards needed on third or fourth down. So he only achieved those numbers 50% of the time that he caught the ball, which was a career low. Only 37.5% of Chris Godwin's snaps last season were out of the slot. He had 63% or more out of the slot from 2019 to 2022. And again, I look for a resurgence in that number, especially in Liam Cohen's offense. I talked about the free agent class that Chris Godwin will be a part of. He is projected as of now to get $21 million in average annual value on the open market. But joining him in that free agent class, and again, I will preface this by saying not all of these guys are going to hit free agency, but these are the guys that are currently slotted to hit free agency, among others: Keenan Allen, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, Jalen Waddle, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, Devonta Smith. Those are just some of the names that are slotted to be free agents in 2025. So that class is absolutely loaded. So the Buccaneers have a few options here in terms of roads that they can go down. First, they can let this contract play out, see where Godwin lands at the end of the season, and figure out a way to re-sign him, maybe utilizing the franchise tag again, like they're doing with Antoine Winfield Jr. this year, like they've done with Chris Godwin in the past. Next, they can let the season play out and see how Godwin does, and inevitably let him hit the market in hopes that they can still bring him back, but likely admitting defeat that they won't get him back, because once other teams have the chance to make him their top receiver, places like Buffalo, Kansas City, Baltimore, Carolina, Arizona, there are plenty of teams out there that are going to give Godwin well above $21 million a year in average value, and the Bucs likely will not be able to match it. You can trade him and acquire more draft capital this year or in the future, as a lot of people in the media are starting to suggest. They're starting to throw around the idea of teams inquiring about Chris Godwin on a contract year to try to get him on the team, much like they did with Mike Evans last year as he entered the final year of his deal. Stephon Diggs just got traded to the Houston Texans, and the Texans gave up next to nothing. I could absolutely see a situation where Buffalo is making calls around the league to see what receivers are available, and Godwin would certainly be of interest to them. I think this is the least likely scenario, but it's within the realm of possibility, so it's worth mentioning. Though, unless the team that is calling throws out an offer that's really just too good to be true, I don't see Jason Licht trading Chris Godwin away. Finally, they can try to get an extension done now for under that $20 million a year. And maybe Chris and his agent don't even want to entertain talks, which is absolutely possible. But if Jason Licht can get a 2 or 3 year extension done to tie Chris Godwin to Mike Evans, to tie Chris Godwin to Baker Mayfield, on top of lowering that $27.5 million cap hit that he has this year in a restructure with the extension, that is the ideal scenario. That is the scenario that I wish they could and would pursue. Unfortunately, I think the most likely scenario is number 2, where the Buccaneers let the season play out and allow the chips to fall where they may in free agency. If Godwin blows up, yeah, it helps the Bucs this year, but basically seals their fate of not being able to bring Chris Godwin back. Someone is going to pay an absurd sum of money for Godwin, and well-deserved, well-earned, don't get me wrong, but it's really hard to have 2 wide receivers each making $20 million plus a year. And currently the Buccaneers are the only team in the league in that situation where they have 2 wide receivers making at least $20 million a year on average. In today's NFL, and with the contracts that they just did with Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield, you still expect a contract to get done with Antoine Winfield Jr. I think it's asking too much that the Bucs have Evans and Godwin on the roster in 2025, with both of them making the amount of money that they are making. So, I'm going to jump into the chat really, really quick before we hit the first break. Stu J in the chat says, especially putting him back in the slot, I feel Chris Godwin will be more utilized. I agree 100%. I think Liam Cohen is really going to use him a lot more than Dave Canales did to start the year last year. And like you said, moving him from the outside back to the slot where he does his best work, I think you're really in for a big year out of Chris Godwin. Let's see. Bat W also says Godwin will be much better back in the slot. Stu reacting to those free agent wide receivers, just saying that is a list right there. Divis Druid says, pick up Johnny Wilson late and let him learn under Mike. He is big and can block. as well. Well, Divis Druid, what should the Bucs do in preparation of Godwin's possible departure? I'm going to talk about that next here on the Locked On Bucs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, brake kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every dayers, make sure you are coming back on Monday. It will be a mock draft Monday, and I'm going to forewarn you right now, because of my son's hockey tryout schedule next week, I'm going to be recording a lot of these shows in advance. So if anything major or breaking happens, I will do my best to bring you a bonus episode as quickly as possible. But lots of draft coverage coming up again next week as we continue to dive into that. That draft is going to be here before you know it. So lots of draft coverage coming up next week. But in the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If Chris Godwin leaves, and again, don't get me wrong, I am not pushing for it, I am not rooting for it. I hope, beyond hope, that they find a way to keep him, not only because Chris Godwin is so much fun to watch on the field, but because he is such a great dude. He and Mariah, his wife, have done so much within the Tampa community. I hope he stays a Buccaneer for life. But how do the Bucs prepare for the possibility of him leaving? And the honest answer that I can give you is you bring in a guy now. Evan Klosky has been talking about it since last season on these WTSP Wednesday episodes. But the Bucs can help their current and future situations by bringing in a wide receiver right now this year to contribute as the wide receiver 3 this year before moving up to the wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin moves on. The addition of Randy Gregory that I talked about on yesterday's episode, and I'm going to talk a little bit more coming up in a little bit, it gives the Bucs the ability to use one of these premier picks on a wide receiver. I would no longer be surprised if the Bucs just go best player available at 26 and end up with a wide receiver. But which receivers would fit the Bucs the best, both in terms of contributing now and becoming the complement to Evans next year and beyond? If you start with guys that can be taken at pick 26, you have to start, in my opinion, with Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. 6'4", 200 pounds, coming off of an 845-yard, 11-touchdown season last year for the Longhorns. Adonai Mitchell is a massive deep threat, which the Bucs need. He has sub 4.4 speed. He's not the best at high pointing the ball on 50-50 passes, but the Bucs have Mike Evans, who is one of the best in the business in that aspect. and he can help bring Adonai Mitchell along and improve that aspect of his game. But he's not just a deep threat. He's one of the best red zone threats coming out in the draft. The Bucs pick one spot ahead of the Buffalo Bills, and they could absolutely crush Buffalo's very soul if they were to take Adonai Mitchell one pick ahead of them after the Bills just traded away Stephon Diggs. But I look a little more to day 2. I still think day 1, you're looking for that edge rusher. You're looking for an interior offensive lineman, whether it's Leatu Latu off the edge, maybe Jared Verse falls in your lap, or you got Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon. You could have Graham Barton there. I still look for those players to definitely take priority over anything else. But you still have 3 picks on day 2. You have 3 more picks in the top 100 that you could then utilize on one of these wide receivers. And I look to guys like Keon Coleman out of Florida State, Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. I've talked about him on the show in the past. Johnny Wilson from FSU, which I saw some of you guys talking about in the chat. Divis Druid, most specifically, who said something before we went to break, and then Brendan Rice out of USC. All of these guys bring size to the table. Devontae Walker is the smallest of these receivers that I just named, coming in at 6'2", and then Johnny Wilson. Evan and I talked about him a little bit on Wednesday, 6'7", a full-blown, well, he's down there somewhere kind of guy where Baker can just throw the ball up. And there is not a player in the NFL that is going to compete with his size to win the jump ball. He only runs a 4.5 40, which isn't blazing fast by any means. When you're talking about a guy that's 6'7", that's still pretty darn fast. But he's also got a 37-inch vertical. You mix 6'7" with a 37-inch vertical, he's winning 50-50 balls every time. 50-50 balls now become 99% balls because unless he drops it, nobody else is taking that ball away from him. But I bring these players up for this reason. The Bucs have to help the wide receiver group and get Baker a bona fide wide receiver 3. They thought they had one in Russell Gage. You had the injury problems. He is gone. If you have to address the position anyway to bring in a wide receiver 3, then you need to bring in a guy that can also elevate to wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin leaves. And by getting him now and having him familiar with Liam Cohen's offense, the Bucs are ahead of the game for 2025. Now, does that mean that this player has to move to the slot once Chris Godwin is gone? No, absolutely not. Because then you have guys like Trey Palmer, like Devin Tompkins, who are already there and waiting that can go into that slot position. But right now, Trey Palmer and Devin Tompkins are not outside threats. And if Chris Godwin is spending 2/3 of his snaps like he should in the slot position, those guys are not the outside threats that you need to bring in with guys like Adonai Mitchell, like Johnny Wilson, like Xavier Legette, like Keon Coleman, these other guys that are these big bodied guys who are fast, who can win contested balls, who can win the jump balls. That is the guy that you need on the outside. Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins, they could slide into the slot to replace Chris Godwin there, and they could do just fine as long as they can take the physical toll that playing slot receiver has in the NFL. But you have to bring in that outside threat this year to complement Evans and open things up over the middle for Godwin. So it's a need no matter how you slice it. But drafting a guy in the 6th round probably isn't going to get the job done. That's going to be a role player, a special teamer, which leaves the Bucs in the same position that they were last year, that they are in right this moment as I am talking to all of you, unless they sign a cheap veteran after the draft. But honestly, I'm kind of out on the free agent wide receivers at this point. Allen Robinson, Michael Gallup, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, old and busted slant boy Michael Thomas. Like, those are the options that are out there right now, and they're not great. They're not even really good. They're serviceable at best, I guess, is the nicest way that you could say it. Those guys are not going to come in and add an element or a layer to the offense that wasn't there last year. So coming back on Monday's episode, of course, it's a mock draft Monday, but I'm going to reevaluate the Bucs draft needs in order of importance. But I'm telling you now, do not be surprised if the Buccaneers go wide receiver with one of those 4 top 100 picks that they have in the first 2 days of the draft, because it is a need. It is important. It will help open up Liam Cohen's offense. It will benefit Baker Mayfield. And then the potential preparation for Chris Godwin's departure, which I hope it doesn't happen. All of you in the chat hope it doesn't happen. But at this point, I would say that we're probably in that 80% range that Chris Godwin will no longer be with the Buccaneers after this contract expires. I'm going to jump in to the chat again one more time before we hit the break. Rick Dog says, Johnny Wilson reminds me of Keyshawn Johnson. I'm not sure if I fully agree with that, but yeah, I can see how you got to that conclusion. I'll say that much. And just because I don't really agree, there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our opinions. I know some in the chat are not fans of Chop Robinson, who I've been talking about a lot. I know, a lot of you guys are not going to be fans of my favorite prospects in the draft, but that's fine. As long as all of you band together and hope that they succeed once they put on a Buccaneers uniform. Bat W says, Tompkins is in for a fun year as our kickoff returner if he can keep the job. He wasn't all that impressive when he had his opportunities to return last year. Need a big improvement out of him in that aspect this year, especially with the rules changes, or the Bucs are going to be looking for somebody else to take over that job and really be able to flip the field now with the new kickoff rules. But Randy Gregory tells the media his expectations for this season. That is coming up next here on Locked On Bucs. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this. Now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Wrapping things up here on a live Friday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And Randy Gregory was introduced to the media on Thursday following his signing with the Bucs on a 1-year deal worth $3 million. And Gregory was asked about his role in Tampa and what he's going to expect coming in. And Gregory said, quote, "At this point in my career, I don't go in expecting or anything like that. I wouldn't say that. I expect to help, and I expect to influence the team how I know I can and make plays the way I know I can. At the end of the day, it's really what you make it. I expect to come in here and keep my head down. Like I said, I know Coach Bowles. I know what he expects. I know what Coach Edwards expects, referring to George Edwards, the Bucs outside linebackers coach, who he played for in Dallas. I think it's big to have a guy like that. Obviously, Coach Edwards has worked with me before. So to be able to be in that room and do things the way I know how he wants it done will be really easy for me. To answer your question, I don't really expect to start or anything like that. I don't go in with my mind made up about that stuff. I'm going to go in there every rep I have. And when I'm not in there, I'm going to try to help out the guys that are in there, end quote. So I had said on yesterday's episode that I felt like this signing signified Randy Gregory being penciled in as a quote unquote starter, but broke down how some of his defensive snap percentages have worked out. He's not going to be on the field for really more than half the snaps unless he really starts to explode. And this, to me, is a guy that isn't walking into the building and thinking he's a legend or thinking he's big man on campus or anything like that. He knows he'll fit in on the defense, and he trusts Bowles to put him in the right position to succeed to help the defense. He knows what Coach Edwards expects out of his outside linebackers, out of his edge rushers. He knows the way that Edwards wants those guys to play. I'm not sure that this mentality, this attitude, this view of his role with the team is something that we could have said about Randy Gregory 2 or 3 years ago. I think it does show a level of maturity. He's gone through, some rough spots in his career. A lot of that was self-inflicted, but you at least like to see the growth and the learning from those hard times. And of course, you can have a player say all of those things and say all of the right things, but it's about action. Talk the talk, but walk the walk. Or as a guy that I used to work with a long time ago used to say all the time, don't talk about it, be about it. So still need to see that aspect, but it looks like Randy Gregory is really saying all of the right things. And as I said on Thursday's show, I'm not expecting him to come in and be a double-digit sack guy or be the anchor on the edge that gets 70, 75, 80% of snaps. He is a role player. He is a rotational player, but that helps give them the experience and production at a position of need, opening things up for them 3 weeks from now in the draft. Yes, I would still prefer the Bucs get Latu, get Verse in the draft, but now if those guys don't fall to the Bucs or even get close enough for Jason Light to make a move to go up and go get them, it's not the end of the world. The cornerbacks still need help. The offensive line still needs help. Wide receivers, we've talked about them a lot on this episode. Running backs, safeties, linebackers, all those positions need to be addressed in one way or another. So adding Gregory to a rotation that includes relatively unknown guys like Marquise Watts and Jose Ramirez, who Jason Light and Todd Bowles are still extremely high on and felt like they got a steal last year. I can tell you with 100% certainty that Jason Light was really, really stoked to get Jose Ramirez where he did and saw the potential in Ramirez. Unfortunately, Ramirez kind of got derailed by some injuries for his rookie year, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't starting to learn and grasp the offense or the defense, wasn't able to start to get an understanding of his role. And now hopefully he can put that understanding into production as he is part of this rotation as well. But Randy Gregory gives this team the wiggle room that they really, really needed. So if they land Latu or Verse, that's great. If they love Chop and think that he's going to be an incredible player and they want to take him at 26, great. But they don't have to force the issue and hyper-focus on anything anymore. Jason Light is at his best when he lets the draft fall to him. And that is now the situation that the Buccaneers are setting up. You go back to some of the draft classes that Jason Light has had that did not pan out so well, and you could see where he was forcing picks at positions of need instead of just letting the draft fall to him. 2018 really comes to mind. I still don't blame him for Roberto Aguayo. That decision was kind of above his head and was a situation that he should not have been put in to begin with, because he's the one that's always going to be linked to that trade and to that pick. But I digress. This is, and I know there's a couple of people that have reached out to me that are not happy at all about the Randy Gregory signing, and I understand. I get it. But this isn't adding Jason Pierre-Paul. This isn't adding, I mean, to a certain extent, it's not adding Shaq Barrett, but Shaq Barrett was a relative unknown back when he was brought in from the Denver Broncos. So all you're looking for right now, especially with some of these late stage veteran free agents, is you're looking to build depth. You're looking for draft weekend flexibility. And the Bucs are getting ever so much closer to being able to make that a thing. So, going to jump into the chat one more time before we get out of here. Scotty J, I'd take a flyer on Drake Stoops as the number 3 wide receiver. Scotty, I still haven't got, I know you've texted me about Drake before. I still have not gotten to him yet. I promise I will. I will talk about Drake Stoops before the draft actually rolls around. Jordan says, what about Brendan Rice from USC? He is one of the receivers that I mentioned that would be a day 2 target for the Buccaneers, especially if they are of the mindset that they're bringing in a wide receiver 3 now for someone that could develop into the wide receiver 2 if Chris Godwin leaves. But he is a really, really solid option for the Bucs, especially with one of those 2 third-round picks that could play on the outside opposite of Evans and allow Chris to do his thing out of the slot. Bat W says, no on Chop, only 4 sacks last year. Don't stress on the sack numbers. Chop Robinson, I am a big fan of Chop Robinson. It's about the athletic profile. It's about what his athleticism and his motor and his speed can do in Todd Bowles' defense. So don't stress on the sack numbers. Penn State overall, not a great football team last year. So don't put too much weight into that. You have to take a look at what he can do and then kind of superimpose that into a Todd Bowles defense. And that's where you see the true potential and the true upside of Chop Robinson if he ends up being the pick. With that, I am going to go ahead and get out of here. Please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you are following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up today. And again, one last reminder, my son has hockey tryouts starting Monday, and he will have hockey 6 out of the 8 nights starting Monday. So a lot of next week is going to be pre-recorded. If something big happens, I will bring you a bonus episode as fast as humanly possible, but going to have to get a lot of draft talk done ahead of time so that I can schlep him all over God's green earth for all of these different tryouts. But I appreciate all of you bearing with me, and fingers crossed that things go well. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.